News app.
Hey there, everyone. I'm Errol Barnett reporting to you from our CBS News Bureau here in the nation's capital. It's great to be with you. Thanks so much for joining us. Here's a quick look at the top stories we're watching for you right now.
Our country is being dealt one historic humiliation after another on the world stage. And at home, our most basic rights and liberties are totally under siege.
I truly do believe that elections are about the future. And that it's absolutely essential at a time when so many Americans are hurting. So many families are struggling.
The former president and vice president both appearing in the nation's capital. For Donald Trump, it marks his first time in D.C. since he left the White House, the latest on where the two men's visions meet and diverge. The International Monetary Fund is saying a global recession cannot be ruled out as the White House maintains that it's not inevitable. More on what's behind that forecast and how the administration is responding to messaging. The White House COVID coordinator says the president can emerge from COVID isolation after testing positive for the virus. That's if he tests negative for the virus on Tuesday. And later this hour for you, legislation to provide funding for U.S.-produced semiconductors has advanced in the Senate. The essential chips are used in everything from cars to computers to medical supplies. Plus, Georgia's Governor Brian Kemp, a former ally of President Trump who became persona non grata, testified before a grand jury in an investigation looking into the former president's attempt to interfere in the 2020 election. The latest on where that's headed. But we begin tonight with former President Trump speaking this afternoon at his first event in D.C. since leaving the nation's capital following the January 6th riot. His speech comes after his former vice president spoke this morning to young conservatives also here in Washington. Mr. Trump focused on crime throughout much of his remarks. Take a look.
Under the Democrat rule in Democrat-run cities, Democrat-run states, and a Democrat-run federal government, the criminals have been given free rein more than ever before. There's never been a time like this. Our streets are riddled with needles and soaked with the blood of innocent victims. Many of our once great cities, from New York to Chicago to L.A., where the middle class used to flock to live the American dream, are now war zones, literal war zones.
I don't know that our movement is that divided. I don't know that the president and I differ on issues. But we may differ on focus. I truly do believe that elections are about the future. And that it's absolutely essential at a time when so many Americans are hurting, so many families are struggling, that we don't give way to the temptation to look back. But I think the time has come for us to offer a bold, positive agenda to bring America back.
Interesting to see some of the contrasts there. For more, let's bring in Finn Gomez and Nicole Killian. Finn is our CBS News political director, and Nicole is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Favorites of mine, personally. Viewers should be well aware. Great to have you both. Nicole, you're still there at the venue where former President Trump spoke today. He spoke quite a lot about crime, among other things, specifically what he has long described as his love of police officers. Let's just listen to another sampling of that. No worries. Nicole, we watched you turn around instead because we don't have that sound queued up. So let me get straight to you and ask what your reflections are from hearing the messaging in former president's speech today, considering crime, immigration, old chestnuts, so to speak, when he was campaigning for president. What did you make of his messaging today?
Well, look, this was about kind of laying out some of the messaging that we have heard from Republicans, but, really trying to galvanize the base ahead of the midterms, as well as, of course, the 2024 election, should he decide to get in. And so he talked towards the end of his speech that he would likely lay out more policy ideas in the future. But, this particular speech was more centered and focused around the issue of crime. And so while we did hear the former president bring up a lot of familiar themes like illegal immigration and, this issue of, really addressing a lot of crime that occurs in a number of cities, he once again, kind of brought back this theme of a law and order, which is something he talked about quite extensively, especially not only during his initial campaign in 2016, but more specifically in 2020. So we heard him really talk about trying to restore a lot of the policies that he enacted when he was in office. For instance, on the issue of immigration, he talked about, for instance, trying to restore a lot of his policies from his administration, like the Remain in Mexico policy. He talked about, for instance, had he won the election, that, they were trying to expand the wall, and that if he had stayed in office, that was something potentially that would have happened. And so he additionally talked about, again, just dealing with the issue of crime. He talked about a number of anecdotes in different cities across the country and accused Democrats of not doing enough on the issue of crime, talked about, boosting funding for police, making sure there are more officers on the street, restoring controversial policies like stop and frisk, taking down tent cities in, various cities in terms of the issue of homelessness, and trying to erect areas on the fringes and outside of cities to deal with the issue of homelessness. So, there were a number of ideas that he put forth, a number of ideas that we have heard before, again, mostly trying to talk about, in his view, that he feels the country is in decline, not only in terms of crime, but also in terms of the economy, foreign policy. And he did suggest that, it is important in his view to try to bring a lot of those policies back. And while he didn't go so far as saying he would get back in for 2024, he did talk about the significance of whether, again, it's in these 2022 midterms or in 2024, making sure those Republican policies are restored.
Yeah, and it's a great point you make, Nicole, at how a lot of this messaging is what worked for the former president in his previous campaign. And while he's not announced officially, we're certainly looking at this to see what new messaging might emerge. Finn, I know that the president barely mentioned the January 6th committee hearings. That's the new development that puts him squarely at the center of a congressional probe about how he behaved at the end of the last election. Georgia has its own investigation into this. What jumped out at you as far as what he did and did not focus on?
Well, as you mentioned, Errol, he basically stayed on message, which is something you don't typically see from a Trump speech. Frankly, he sort of meanders and goes off into different topics and whatever sort of fits his mood at the time. But today was, as Nicole said, primarily on message. It was on crime. It was on law and order, something that was policy driven. However, he did speak on the January 6th committee hearings. He did call them the unselect committee. He called the members of the committee thugs. And he said they want to damage me so I cannot go back to work for you, alluding to 2020 perhaps. And I don't think that is going to happen, he said. So, I mean, even if he didn't mention it that much, he did mention it, and I believe it was significant.
And that's what I wonder for moderates, right? We've had Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell acknowledge that suburban moderates are really key to a lot of these Republican efforts for the midterm elections. And those moderate women who he mentioned,
sure,
while they may like the message, old school message to be tough on crime, they've certainly been among the tens of millions of Americans watching the January 6th hearings. I just want to kind of now contrast what the former president said with what the former vice president said. A different speech, using his remarks this morning to talk about his own vision for the future. Let's listen to some of that and see how it compares to what President Trump was saying.
Conservatism is bigger than any one moment, any one election, or any one person. It's always been about ideas. And Yaf has been there every step of the way for half a century, inspiring Americans who cherish those ideals of freedom. And I know you'll continue to do just that. And I'm proud to say, under the Trump-Pence administration, it was those ideas that drove our policies every single day.
For Nicole, what did you make of what the former vice president had to say, and what, in your view, could indicate that he may be a potential presidential candidate in 2024?
Well, look, we have seen the former vice president, much like the president, former president, I should say, travel the country and talk to a number of different audiences. I mean, today it was talking to young conservatives. I mean, just last week he was here in Washington meeting with a conservative group of House Republicans. So, make no mistakes, Mike Pence has been making the rounds. And, while he also hasn't really talked extensively about January 6th, as you heard him earlier in his speech say, it is about looking to the future. And much of his messaging has been about, how do we grapple and deal with some of the issues facing the American people right now. And, he referenced earlier in his speech today, that many Americans are hurting. And so, whether it's the issue of the economy, whether it is other issues that are important to the base, we have certainly seen the former vice president try to go out and make the case and really kind of toe that line, while he was kind of complimentary of the policies of the Trump-Pence administration. At the same time, he does have to kind of walk this fine line, even though there are differences, certainly between him and the former president, especially as we have learned a lot of new information through the course of, for instance, of this January 6th, the committee hearings and the like. But that, again, is something where we haven't really seen Mike Pence, just very limited at times, kind of addressing that issue, addressing the fact that he did his duty that day, but also still towing the line of the successes, in his view, of the past administration, of his administration, and that of the former presidents, because at the same time, if he does eventually make a run or put his name in the hat, he does have to hold on to some components of that base, right? So that has really been a lot of his messaging throughout as he has traveled throughout the country.
It will be really interesting to watch. At some point, these, this former president and vice president may diverge on their messaging. It hasn't happened just yet. Finn Gomez and Nicole Killian, thank you both very much.
Thanks, Errol.
For the day's news at the White House, CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns joins us now. Caitlin, always great to see you. I have high confidence you'll do a great job every time. But the first thing I want to ask, I'll ask you about is something that's tanking right now, which is consumer confidence. We just want to show the survey measuring how consumers feel about their expected financial situation. It's dropped 2.7 points from where it was in June, which already marked the lowest point in a decade. And what continues to rise, of course, is inflation. It's at 9.1%, the highest in 40 years. And it's not just an American problem. The Federal Reserve is expected to raise interest rates again this week. So, Caitlin, the White House continues to say the U.S. is not in a recession. Look at the actual definition. We're not there. But look at how Americans feel, and the messaging from Wall Street, it's certainly a concerning one. What is the White House trying to do to right the ship and the messaging?
Well, you put it so perfectly, Errol, that there is this definition of a recession. The White House is claiming that they're not going with the traditional definition of a recession, which is, 2 quarters, consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, but they're pointing to the National Bureau of Economic Research and kind of a bigger scale of data points. But the biggest, questions to them today from reporters has been, okay, well, squabbling over the definition of a recession aside, people are telling us, and they're telling us through the things like you just mentioned, the consumer confidence drop and other measures, that they're just not feeling good about the economy. So on one hand, the White House is trying to say, look, we've been trying to address this. We've been trying to push forward policies to address this. There are other things to blame, like the supply chain, the war in Ukraine. But on the same token, there are these worries that consumers have, that everyday Americans have, that they feel deal every time they fill up a gas tank. And as I know you've been covering on the transportation beat, airfare costs are high. We're in summer months. People can't go on vacation. Cost of everything is just really high. So this is a problem for the White House, especially heading into a midterm election year if that persists. But that is what they were trying to address today. And I asked the White House economic advisor, Brian Deese, came out to brief reporters today for a long period of time, took a lot of questions. And one of the questions I asked was about that drop in consumer confidence. If you have all these things that you're trying to do, why are consumers just not feeling it? And he said, look, inflation is an issue, gas prices are high, costs of goods are high, so people, while they're spending money, they're having to spend a lot of it. And so that means they're not feeling good about the economy. They also point to things like steady job growth, the low employment numbers. They also say that people, credit and mortgage stress isn't high. So they're kind of trying to point to these other factors. But bottom line, people are just not feeling good about the economy, and that is registering some of those numbers.
And the other reality for so many people is COVID. The pandemic is not over, and it's showing up in interesting ways everywhere. Senate Democrats and Republicans now have a very small window to get things done before the August recess. Yet now Democrats have a real COVID problem. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Errol, we were reporting about how the president has COVID, but when you look on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, several lawmakers, including key senators, are also coming down with COVID. And why does that matter? Well, the Senate is evenly split 50-50, Republicans, Democrats. And so it just takes one to be out of session, essentially, to thwart anything that this White House wants to do. And of course, they're working on this big reconciliation bill to deal with the budget priorities. Joe Manchin is one of those senators who came down with COVID. Remember, there's a 5-day isolation period, something that the president is observing himself right now, coming out of COVID. So this just goes to show how, fragile the Democratic majority is in the Senate, that it just takes one person to get sick to kind of stall everything. And as you mentioned, that calendar, that window is shrinking.
I also want to ask you about Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, planning to visit Taiwan in coming weeks, getting support from some Trump allies, while congressional Republicans, especially in the Senate, like Mitch McConnell, think this is a terrible idea. What does the White House think about this proposed visit, and what's at stake here?
Yeah, Errol, it's a really interesting dynamic where you have people like Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State, cheering on Pelosi for this visit. Now, the White House has been asked about this all week, and they continue to say that they are not putting anything out, that the decision has not actually been made. It's a hypothetical about whether Pelosi will actually attend. But we also know from the president's advisors that they are advising Pelosi's team, according to John Kirby, on the issue in Taiwan. Now, where the Biden administration stands is they really just don't want to upset relations with China at this moment in time. And so that's why you're kind of seeing these criticisms. But you're also hearing from former Trump officials and other people on Capitol Hill, pushing for this, not to bow down to China, essentially, and to go ahead with this visit. So we're keeping an eye on the public schedule, whether in fact it is announced. And the White House says that they are going to wait until that official announcement to officially, publicly weigh in.
All right. Great to chat with you. Caitlin Huey-Burns at the White House for us.
Good to see you, Errol. I always have high confidence in you.
Thank you for that. Much appreciated. Another COVID surge fueled by the Omicron variant has researchers working toward a variant-specific vaccine. But now learning shots could be available sooner than expected. Plus, the latest on the Indiana legislature's special session to consider a bill which would ban nearly all abortions in the state. You're streaming Red and Blue.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Infectious disease and public health specialists gathered at the White House today for a summit on the future of COVID-19 vaccines. Of particular interest is combating the BA.5 subvariant, which now accounts for 90% of new U.S. cases. Deborah Alfarone has more.
We need vaccines that can protect us no matter what Mother Nature throws at us.
Federal health officials gathered with top scientists and vaccine manufacturers at the White House to discuss efforts to kickstart the next generation of vaccines.
The vaccines we have are terrific, but we can do better than terrific.
The summit comes as COVID-19 infections have ticked up around the world, with the highly contagious Omicron BA.5 and BA.4 subvariants accounting for more than 90% of recent cases in the U.S. alone.
Since September of 2020, this virus has continued to prove more than a formidable foe, with variants of concerns emerging, each with a bit of enhanced transmissibility.
Vaccine boosters that are more targeted to the Omicron subvariants could be available this fall. At the summit, government and industry experts push to continue partnering to develop more accessible vaccines that could eventually cause little to no side effects, using delivery methods beyond needles, such as nasal sprays. President Biden is on his 5th day of isolation as he recovers from COVID-19. His physician says his symptoms have almost completely resolved, and he's actually feeling well enough to resume physical exercise.
I'm feeling great. I hope it comes across that way as well. I hope I look as great as I feel here.
Tuesday, the president attended more events virtually. He has told reporters he hopes to return to in-person work by the end of the week, though administration health officials say he must first produce a negative COVID test result. Deborah Alfarone, CBS News, the White House.
Hundreds of protesters rallied at the Indiana State House Monday as local lawmakers debate a near-total ban on abortion. Indiana is the first state to hold a special session to debate reproductive rights. This follows the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade. Vice President Harris traveled to Indianapolis Monday to denounce the measure proposed by state Republicans. The legislation aims to ban all abortion in Indiana unless the pregnancy is the result of rape or incest or if the mother's life is in danger. The special session to debate the law could take several weeks. An abortion provider who, according to Indiana records, treated a 10-year-old rape victim says she has received death threats due to her work. Our Nora O'Donnell spoke exclusively with Dr. Caitlin Bernard about being a reproductive healthcare worker in the wake of Roe v. Wade being overturned. Here's part of their conversation.
There were Republican lawmakers. There was the Wall Street Journal editorial page that doubted the veracity of that case. To those that doubt the veracity of children needing abortions, what would you say?
Come spend a day in my clinic. Come see the care that we provide every single day. The situations that people find themselves in and in need of abortion care are some of the most difficult that you could imagine. And that's why we as physicians need to be able to provide that care unhindered, that medical decisions need to be made between a physician and their patients.
Have you felt threatened?
Yes. It shows how, abortion, instead of being part of healthcare, which it is, a needed life-saving procedure, which it is, has been used to create a wedge between people politically and personally, and it shows how far we have come and how sad that is.
And you can watch more of Nora O'Donnell's exclusive interview with Dr. Caitlin Bernard on tonight's Evening News right here on CBS. A former top aide to Vice President Mike Pence has testified before a federal grand jury about January 6th. The VP's former chief of staff, Mark Short, appeared before a grand jury looking into the Capitol riot on Friday, saying he was responding to a subpoena. Short has previously testified before the January 6th committee and was with Vice President Pence during the Capitol riot. We've also learned the speech President Trump made a day after the attack included a line to prosecute the Capitol rioters, which he crossed out. The January 6th committee released a copy of a draft of his remarks today with handwritten notes from the former president. The Senate is taking up a bill that would provide funding for making semiconductors. The legislation passed through a procedural vote today with bipartisan support. It would give $52 billion in subsidies to semiconductor companies. The chips they manufacture, of course, are in everything from autos to medical supplies. The Biden administration says the technology is critical for the economy, and the president says he will sign the bill. New allegations aimed at the Justice Department in its handling of information relating to Hunter Biden. What one Republican senator is sharing about whistleblower accusations. Plus, WNBA star Brittany Griner returns to a Russian courtroom. We'll bring you the latest on her defense to fight a potential 10-year prison sentence. You're streaming CBS News.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
A warm welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Errol Barnett. Here's a look at some of our top stories right now. The Pacific Northwest is bracing for several days of record-setting triple-digit heat. It could last for several days. Some parts of Oregon and Washington state could see temperatures as high as 110 degrees by the end of this week. Some 13 million people there are under heat advisories. Plus, the CDC says the U.S. now has the highest number of new monkeypox cases in the world. More than 3,800 infections have been reported in this country. The Biden administration is considering declaring the virus a public health emergency. And former President Donald Trump has returned to Washington for the first time since he left office to speak at a conservative think tank. His remarks come at the same time former Vice President Mike Pence spoke just a few blocks away, also earlier today. Natalie Brand has more on what this could mean for the 2024 presidential election.
In a possible preview of 2024, former President Donald Trump and his former vice president held dueling appearances in Washington, D.C.
When we win a triumphant victory in 2022 and when a Republican president takes back the White House in 2024, which I strongly believe will happen.
Mr. Trump focused on crime ahead of this year's midterms and the next presidential election in 2 years.
We need an all-out effort to defeat violent crime in America and strongly defeat it and be tough and be nasty and be mean if we have to.
Former Vice President Mike Pence, when asked about the divide between the two former running mates, said they don't differ on issues, but on focus, expressing a desire to move past 2020.
I truly do believe that elections are about the future, and that it's absolutely essential at a time when so many Americans are hurting, so many families are struggling, that we don't give way to the temptation to look back.
Looking back, the January 6th Select Committee hearings have drawn a contrast between the actions of the former president and his vice president on that day. In a new book to be released later this year, Pence says the former president severed their relationship on January 6th.
President Biden, in some of his most forceful remarks about the Capitol assault,
Donald Trump lacked the courage to act.
Took aim at Mr. Trump's message of law and order.
You can't be pro-insurrection and pro-cop. You can't be pro-insurrection and pro-democracy. You can't be pro-insurrection and pro-American.
And in a major development in the criminal investigation into January 6th, Mark Short, Pence's former chief of staff, confirmed he testified before a federal grand jury looking into the assault. Natalie Brand, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
For more on all of this, you're all in for a treat because we've got Leslie Sanchez and Ray Zaccaro to join us to discuss all of this. Leslie is a CBS News political analyst and a Republican strategist. Ray is a Democratic strategist and principal at the Klein Johnson Group. A warm welcome to you both. I quickly just want to get to this clip of President Trump because it seemed as though the topic he wanted to hit again and again was crime in his speech this afternoon. Here's a quick snippet.
The dangerously deranged roam our streets with impunity. We're living in such a different country for one primary reason. There is no longer respect for the law, and there certainly is no order.
Leslie, what do you make of the effectiveness of this message for the former president to say he will once again be the law and order president and be tough on crime? Does this land as it did back in 2016, 2017, considering so many Americans are watching the January 6th hearings and hearing the allegations of an attempt to overturn the previous election?
That's a really good juxtaposition of both of those issues. But I will tell you, in voters' minds, particularly Republican primary voters, they don't make that connection. What's interesting about the president's speech is he is talking about an issue that consistently is polling very high among right-of-center voters. They're very concerned about the rising crime, concerned about policing. They wrap that into even, and you heard him talk a lot about it, the border security issue and kind of no respect for the rule of law, open borders. Together, combining whether it's a national security message with respect to U.S.-Mexico border or policing, keeping our streets and communities safe, it's an area that's a really high point right now for a lot of voters, and they're going to pay attention, I think, particularly to that message.
And Ray, on that point, violent crime rates in many places in the country are up. I mean, no matter what party you're affiliated with, if any, you may personally feel that something different needs to be done to address it. In your view, are Democrats potentially vulnerable on this issue as we look at the midterms and how this messaging may evolve?
Well, first, thanks, Earl, for having me on again. And I'll say this. Forgive me if I take comments about crime and the rule of law from a man who attempted a coup and overthrow of the government and to throw out the results of elections and who's under multiple investigations for criminality. However, that being said, look, unquestionably, there are a lot of issues on voters' minds. Their quality of life, their personal economies, their dealing with a changing, ever-changing role of COVID in society. And right now, one of the biggest issues on people's minds is the overturn of Roe v. Wade. I think that if you're talking about issues that people are affected by, right at the top of the consideration of a lot of voters, Democrat, Republican, and Independent, is the concern about the pressures of the freedoms deteriorating from people's very eyes, the threats against things like marriage equality, settled law that we've come to enjoy in this country. I think that those things are really at the forefront of voters' minds right now.
There was another interesting component at play today. You had former Vice President Mike Pence holding his own address. And Leslie, he once again, we seem to keep waiting for this, but it doesn't really happen. He avoided any criticism of former President Trump. He dodged it once again. Surely there's a political reason, perhaps a personal reason. During the January 6 hearings, we heard allegations about the president. Effectively, he made it dangerous for the former vice president. What do you make of his reluctance, VP Pence, in criticizing former President Trump, and how long do you think that's going to last?
Errol, another really good point. I think this is a case where the former vice president was reading the room. If you look at the comments in terms of how his speech was received, it was pretty flat. They didn't like his energy. They didn't like what he was saying. They called him a traitor. There were certainly individuals who appreciated the vice president being there. But in terms of favorability, even now, compared to the former president, he's almost a man without a party. There were so many people thinking, just in conversation, he should be a Democrat. That is not a party that is in favor of you and looking lovingly, at you as you give your speech and start positioning yourself for 2024. That's going to be his challenge. So had he compounded that lack of favorability with criticism of Trump, it would have been a really difficult speech to deliver. But times will change, as was just raised, as investigations continue, as there's possible Department of Justice criminal charges, as the political dynamic and the judicial dynamic change, the voters' minds may change. But I think Pence has a very high hill to climb.
Well, that's an interesting point you make, and I want to follow up on that because you wonder if there is any risk to the former vice president walking that fine line, right? Behaving in a way and making speeches as if he's running, but not actually making the announcement. I just want to show you this quick clip, which speaks to that.
Now, some people may choose to focus on the past, but elections are about the future. And I believe conservatives must focus on the future to win back America.
Does that inspire you, Leslie? Or does that worry you?
Someone has to step in the arena. And, Republicans, we like to do it by the dozens. So, there are going to be a lot of people stepping forward and looking to see at the viability. They're making their political calculation and going to wait and see the political viability of the former president. It takes all the oxygen in the room, raises all the money. And what's the interesting point, now I'll close on this, was if you compare this to 2015, what the former president was saying, it was a muted, dulled blade. But the severity of the cut in terms of how it was landing for voters to look at, compare Republican versus Democrat ideals and where we were taking the country, I thought was really effective. So again, you're in a situation, you may not like Trump, you may not know if Trump will be around, but you agree with what he's saying. And those are the Republicans he's leaning toward, and that's going to be the complex nature of the party in a primary moving forward.
Ray, let's speak about your party, the Democrats, and how things will look like for them after the midterm elections. Historically speaking, the party in power faces headwinds, usually loses seats. There's a handful of Senate races, though, which look far from clear. What do you think are the Democrats' chances of holding on to either chamber post-November?
Well, look, unquestionably, Democrats have a tough road ahead of them for this November. As you stated, midterm elections tend to be troubling for the party in power. But I will say this. You have an administration who has signed for the first time in decades gun control legislation. You have an administration that is likely to pass some form of budget reconciliation that will address Medicare pricing and shore up the Affordable Care Act. You have an administration and a record that shows commitment to making sure that middle-class economies are improving. You also have some of these very radical candidates, as you see in Ohio, and J.D. Vance, who's just reported today that he believes people who are in abusive and violent marriages should stay in those marriages. You have Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania. You can go on and on the list of candidates who are extremists, and I think that absolutely helps the odds for Senate Democrats to, at the very least, maintain the majority. And I can't stress it enough. Look, reproductive rights are going to be on the ballot this November. I think that it helps a lot of candidates who may have been in a little bit more trouble prior to that decision. There's no question, though, that the value right now, the values for Democrats to be talking about are the kitchen table values that they care about most, that voters care about most. People care about housing, they care about education, they care about health care, they care about their own economies. And that's what Democrats are going to be talking about in November.
And Leslie, let me ask you about Ray's point, because we began this conversation by noting former President Trump is hitting that crime message, and you alluded to the fact that, look, Republican primary voters eat that up with a biscuit. I don't think you used that phrase, but it's the type of messaging.
Thank you, Errol.
There you go. There you go.
Nice.
It's the messaging that lands with them. However, are you worried about some of the primary candidates, and Ray is here calling them radical and extremist, could actually jeopardize a general election win?
You know, if you go back to several midterm election cycles, we've sweated that many times. Yeah. When you think about some of our candidates, we've gone through some odd ones, to be very transparent and fair, but so have the Democrats. And I think the current right now is obviously, for historical reasons and for economic reasons, in favor of Republicans. They're feeling very bullish about it. All of those other things, when you blow past and kind of listen to the signal that voters are sending is this is an economic election. This is a pocketbook election. They're very frustrated about increased inflation, very frustrated, and believe that the fault of that lies on the Biden administration for inflating and artificially holding up the economy with all of these payments that went out for, across the country. And now that those surplus payments have ended, and now they're paying the price and taxes are going up and they're feeling the pinch everywhere. So that's going to be top of mind for the foreseeable future. And as long as that is, I think regardless of how much you may like these candidates, are going to look for the one that's more economically conservative or at least going in a different direction.
Well, it's great to speak with you both, Leslie Sanchez and Ray Zacario, wrapping up our pilot episode of Biscuits, Gravy, and Politics. Great to chat with you both.
Well done. Thank you.
A top GOP senator says the FBI is downplaying negative information about Hunter Biden. Whistleblowers have come forward to Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley, according to letters obtained by CBS News. The senator says they detail an effort to discredit information on the president's son inside the agency. Grassley wrote a letter Tuesday to the FBI and the Justice Department on this issue. WNBA player Brittany Griner's defense team continued to make the case for leniency in a Russian court today. A Russian narcology expert testified that medical cannabis is popular in some countries, particularly among athletes. Griner's lawyers say she unintentionally brought the marijuana to the Moscow airport back in February due to hurried packing. The 31-year-old pleaded guilty to drug charges earlier this month. Griner could face up to 10 years in prison. Georgia's Republican Governor Brian Kemp faced a grand jury yesterday to answer questions about former President Trump's efforts to interfere with the 2020 presidential election, what his testimony could reveal, and the latest on other top Republicans who are expected to follow suit. You're streaming Red and Blue.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging winds.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Georgia Governor Brian Kemp testified on Monday in the Fulton County District Attorney's investigation into former President Trump's attempts to change the state's 2020 presidential election results. Now, Kemp is one of several high-profile Republican officials who resisted Trump's attempts to alter the election. The District Attorney's office also requested documents from Kemp's office by Monday relating to the former president. District Attorney Fani Willis has issued a flurry of other subpoenas in recent weeks, including to Senator Lindsey Graham and former Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani. Anthony Michael Kreis is an assistant professor of law at Georgia State University, and he joins me now to talk about what's happening here. Anthony, thank you for your time today. Governor Kemp ran afoul of former President Trump for refusing to push this notion of a fraudulently stolen election in Georgia, but that decision immediately put him in Trump's crosshairs. What might the DA want to hear from Kemp?
Well, we know that the former president asked Governor Kemp to convene a special session of the General Assembly in an attempt to create a new slate of electors and sow confusion into the counting of the Electoral College results. And so we might want to know what kind of conversations the two of them had. We might want to know if there was any pressure put on the governor. We know that pressure was put on by Donald Trump to state officials like Brad Raffensperger. We also know that there was some pressure exerted on the Senate candidates at the time, Kelly Loeffler and former Senator Perdue. So we might want to know, the dynamics there, what the request was, what requests were made, and what inducements or other forms of perhaps bargaining was underway.
And I guess the DA would need to piece together the sequence of events, all communication, who said what when, and why. D.C. Willis has subpoenaed South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, as we've mentioned, and Mr. Trump's former personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, among others. What are the odds, do you think, these subpoenas might make it to former President Trump himself?
I suspect there's a pretty good chance. What the DA is doing here is pretty typical of what any DA would do in building a case, which is you start from the bottom and you work your way up. And I think that we're getting closer towards an inflection point now where you're really starting to see her subpoena bigger actors and perhaps try to leverage certain individuals against the former president and his allies. And so it's hard to predict exactly where she's going to go or where the path might take the special grand jury. But I wouldn't discount the possibility that eventually a subpoena lands in front of Donald Trump.
And as we've heard during the January 6th committee hearings, you know, this effort to put fake electors together was really central to this scheme. 16 Trump allies involved in creating that alternate elector slate were notified they could face charges in this ongoing investigation led by Willis. What can you just tell us about where the case stands today?
Well, of course, grand jury proceedings are always secret. And so it's anybody's guess what exactly is happening or where exactly the state of the investigation lies. Of course, I think it's true, at least it seems from indications from the judge and from certain folks who are in the know, that this may well go into October, November, December. So we have a considerable amount of time. I think that really at the end of the day, what we do know is that it is in fact heating up. The focus on the fake electors, I think, is really important because it's kind of that crucial linchpin between the campaign and some of the more, obviously potential criminality in terms of submitting false documents and things of that nature, forgeries, or there's a lot of potential allegations that could come out of that. So again, it's very hard to say, but I think what we can say decisively is that things are heating up. And you certainly wouldn't want to be somebody who was in the former president's circle, who was also active in Georgia after the elections. It seems the spotlight is just getting hotter and hotter.
And so considering that, I mean, you give a pretty long runway for how long this case could continue to unfold. If, in fact, these allegations are proven true, how might this have wider implications beyond Georgia?
Well, I think at the end of the day, people in Georgia, people in Fulton County, and everybody across the country has to ask this fundamental question, which is, why are we doing this? If it's just to get folks hooked on a couple misdemeanors, then that seems to be a lot of time and resources spent on pretty low level offense. But I don't think that's exactly what's happening here. I think at the end of the day, what the DA recognizes, what the people of Georgia recognize, is that this was an attempt, I think, to quite obviously overthrow democracy in the state of Georgia and in the United States, and to subvert a lawful, transparent, clean election. History is replete with examples of when anti-democratic forces have gotten away with it. They're just energized to continue apace. And I think that what we're doing here is trying to do a couple of things, which is first, get a substantial, complete, and fair record, a historical one for history and for the general public's understanding of exactly what happened in Georgia and how can it be prevented again, and to seek some form of justice, which I think is also something that people here and across the country direly want.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And looking at these allegations, when you spend time with it and really think about the implications, it's quite sobering. Anthony Michael Christ, thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
A fresh new poll shows Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmitt with a firm lead in the Republican Senate primary. He leads Representative Vicky Hartzler and former Governor Eric Greitens. Greitens, you may remember, faces criticism from both Democrats and Republicans after a series of scandals, including accusations of abuse from his ex-wife. He resigned his job as governor, in fact, in the wake of some of those scandals. Retiring Missouri Senator Roy Blunt, among other prominent Republicans, have called for Greitens to drop out of this race. Now, we're getting a sense of just how much money some of the nation's top companies have donated to GOP lawmakers who objected to the 2020 presidential election results. A new report from liberal advocacy group Accountable US finds that PACs representing Fortune 500 companies, and you see it on your screen here, donated more than $21 million to those lawmakers since January 6, giving more than $800,000 in June alone. Multiple companies halted donations to election objectors after the Capitol riot. A Pennsylvania GOP congressman attended his son's same-sex marriage days after voting against legislation to protect marriage equality. Glenn Thompson was one of 157 House Republicans who opposed the Respect for Marriage Act. 47 House Republicans supported the measure, which passed in the chamber last week. It now requires the support of 10 Senate Republicans to advance into law. If enacted, this bill would require states to recognize gay marriages performed in other states and provide federal protections for same-sex and interracial couples. All right, at this point, we will take a very short break, which means you have a few minutes to download the free CBS News app on all your devices. How do you not have this already? You catch live local coverage from across the country from all of our CBS stations. And I am contractually obligated to tell you that while you're at it, check out Paramount Plus. We've got a mountain of content for you to stream there as well, including your favorite shows, movies, and sports.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging winds.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell them I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Dozens of people are being evacuated in Missouri after record rainfall flooded several roads and residential neighborhoods there. St. Louis and its surrounding areas experienced up to 10 inches of rain, prompting several home and water rescues. All 4 interstate highways leading to downtown St. Louis experienced closures Tuesday as crews worked to clear all that floodwater. No deaths or serious injuries have been reported. High temperatures and dry conditions continue to fuel wildfires across the U.S. In California, crews are working to contain the Oak Fire. This is near Yosemite National Park. So far, that massive blaze has forced thousands from their homes. Donya Bacchus brings us the latest from Los Angeles.
Nearly 3,000 firefighters working around the clock are making progress containing the Oak Fire near Yosemite National Park. A wave of humidity moved into the area overnight, allowing crews to work on hot spots and set up control lines. As of Tuesday morning, the fire scorched about 28 square miles and was 26% contained, but this fight is far from over.
There's brush that has been on the ground for years now that is just tinder dry. It takes one spark and instantly you have a fire.
Fire officials are confident they can keep the fire out of Yosemite National Park.
Now, at least one of the main roads into Yosemite is closed and inaccessible right now. But we don't believe that the fire is going to get into Yosemite.
At least 55 homes and other structures are damaged or destroyed. The Oak Fire is the third large wildfire in Mariposa County just this month.
If it's not you this time, it'll be next time. That the folks are really on, pins and needles.
Dry conditions are causing fire danger across the country. Near Dallas, Texas, fire officials believe a lawnmower sparked a wildfire that tore through this neighborhood Monday afternoon, burning at least 20 homes.
It jumped from this spot to that spot, just in a matter of seconds. And then everything went completely dark.
And in Alaska, crews have battled more than 530 wildfires. Washington State firefighter Eric Keene shot this video of the clear fire near Fairbanks earlier this month. That fire, still raging, has burned an area the size of Durham, North Carolina. Donya Bacchus, CBS News.
And that does it for us today. Remember, you can stream Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And a quick reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of the program, you can see them on the website of CBS News anytime. Just head to cbsnews.com/redandblue.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
Welcome. You're streaming CBS News. I'm John Dickerson. Thank you for joining us. Here's a look at our top stories. Flash floods swamp St. Louis, which gets more rain in one day than ever recorded. Planes, trains, and buses crawl or are stopped altogether. Residents are rescued from their homes by boat. In the cruel extremities of weather, out west, water would be a godsend. The Oak Fire in California experienced what authorities call explosive fire behavior, throwing embers in front of itself for up to 2 miles.